I just want to thank you for attending, and we are going to kind of get right into it. So with this presentation, I want to talk a little bit about general musculoskeletal injury overview. So MSI is for musculoskeletal injuries. We're going to be talking about risk factors, how to identify them. There's quite a few different ways to identify them if you're not really sure where you should be starting in your program. I look at job demand assessments a lot. Job demand assessments that either I've completed before, another supervisor, or just job descriptions are a really great way to just start with things. Surveys, lots of different ways that we can find out a little bit about the job and risk factors for injury. We're going to then spend quite a bit of time on reducing musculoskeletal injury risk. And we're going to try and focus on recreation and parks facilities examples today because it's April and many organizations are kind of hiring a new set of staff right now. So we want to make sure that you're well prepared to field some questions and kick everyone off to a really positive and healthy start for the summer. So there's several ways that we can reduce MSI risk. We'll talk about those through tools and equipment, body awareness. We'll talk about my 6 ergo principles, which combine several different risk factor reduction strategies all in one, or all in 6 rather. We'll talk about dynamic warm-ups, which I've talked about with AMHSA before, and then we'll go into a Q&A. So first off, I want to recognize, what a musculoskeletal injury is. And I think the most important thing to remember is that it's an umbrella term that describes several different types of injuries. So injuries that involve the muscles, tendons, ligaments, joints, nerves, all of those things that cause somebody to feel pain, discomfort, numbness, maybe tingling, going from one part of the body to another. And sometimes this happens at work, or sometimes it's something that you've got already and it's aggravated by work. In my world as an ergonomist, I'm constantly looking at interactions in the way that people work and do all of the things that they do. So at work, I'm looking at how people interact with their tools, how people interact with their stairs or chairs or anything that they're walking on, kneeling on. I'm looking at all of these interactions. And so when I'm looking at these interactions, I'm looking at 8 main risk factors that we're going to talk about briefly right now. So the 3 top risk factors, I call these the primary ergonomics risk factors, are for force, posture, and repetition and duration. So when I'm talking about force, I'm talking about lifting, carrying, pushing, pulling, grip forces, pinching, that type of thing. So anything that's requiring force or a load to be moved through some kind of range. We also look at posture. People often tell me, oh, I have really bad posture. And I'm like, no, you probably don't have posture. Posture is just how we move. And we are really great as people at adapting to different situations. So if somebody is bending over to get something on the floor, you don't really have bad posture. You just have to get something that's located on the floor and you're bending your back to do so. So posture is how we move our body through dimensions. So it could be reaching, twisting, kneeling, squatting, bending. Those are some examples. And repetition and duration are really important because they interact with posture and they also interact with force. So, you might have a sustained force. So a force that you're holding for a really long period of time, a load that you're carrying, for example, for a while, or you might be repeating a force. So you might be frequently squeezing something. Or you could be holding a posture for a prolonged period of time, or going in and out of an awkward posture frequently. So I look at those 3 risk factors primarily. but I know that contact stress is a risk factor as well. So if somebody has something that's pressing against their body, they're immediately going to move so that that's not pressing against their body anymore, and that usually results in an awkward posture. So an example of this would be, if you're working at something that's too high for you, you might be resting your forearms on it, and that probably will be uncomfortable for your forearms. So then you'll adopt a shrugged shoulder posture. So you've adopted an awkward posture to get away from this contact stress. Other risk factors that influence these primary risk factors would be vibration or jarring. So either whole body vibration or hand-arm vibration. We also look at hot and cold temperatures. Those really affect people. If we're working in cold environments, then we're dealing with gloves or other PPE, maybe lots of clothing, which adds force demands because it's a higher load, but you might also be gripping a little bit more forcefully to make up for these gloves that you've got. You've got a lack of tactile feedback. Hot temperatures is a big concern as well because we need to make sure that we're getting proper hydration. We don't want to be fainting or having other issues at work. Personal risk factors are taking up a really big part of this page because that's one other thing that we can't really control very well in my world as an ergonomist, but we always recognize that they can influence things. So for example, if you've been injured before, there's a high likelihood that you will be injured again, just because our bodies are really fantastic at healing ourselves, but scar tissue isn't quite as elastic as the real deal. So if we've sprained our ankle, there's a chance that you might be spraining your ankle again. So you should always be trying to do activities the best way that we can. So why do we care about injuries to begin with? So this data is from a few years ago, but it remains quite similar in 2024. So this is specific data to municipalities in Alberta. And so we can see that when we look at the percent of claims from municipalities to the WCB Alberta, 35% of claims, total number of claims, had to do with the back and spine. Shoulder came next, and leg came into third place. When we look at how much total the claims cost as a whole, same thing. It's back, shoulder, leg. So back, shoulder, and leg take up the most number of claims total, and they also cost the most. If we look at the cost of back, shoulder, and leg claims, we're looking at 2/3 of the total injuries. Most of these are a result of musculoskeletal injuries, and that is why we care, and that's why we're all here today. So one of the first things that we can do to try and reduce the number of claims and the severity of claims is by trying to prevent them. And one of the ways of prevention is to kind of find out where they are. One thing that I like to do if I'm kicking off a project or helping somebody else kick off a project is I ask them to look at their statistics, so their own workplace statistics. This can be something formal. It could also be distributing a survey just to find out if staff, employees have any concerns and concerns with job aspects of their jobs, concerns with discomfort that they have, and they might word it like, I find that every time I do this one task, my shoulder hurts or my back hurts. It might just be me, or it might be more people. I encourage people to share all of that because, you might find that there's 5 out of 5 people who report back pain doing the exact same thing. And that's kind of a sign that, oh, you know what, we should do something about it. And if you didn't know that beforehand, then you just wouldn't have known. But now you know we can do something about it. So surveys, looking over your own injury statistics, looking over job demand assessments, if you've got some in-house, is fantastic. If you've got job demand assessments, that's a really great place to start, because you can just look through those job demand assessments. I often look at them with a highlighter, or I look at them in conjunction with some kind of ergonomics hazard screening tool. There's multiple different types out there, all in the public domain. I like to look at those and pull out different items. So I'm going to go through just one of those examples today. The example that I'm going to keep coming back and forth to is one of a lifeguard. I've chose lifeguard for quite a few reasons, one of which is because we're talking about recreation today. And another is I've done tons of work with lifeguards as a lifeguard, but then also professionally, I've done multiple projects in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Alberta, Ontario, lots of very different projects with lifeguarding and other emergency services. So I like to use that example. So it's a great starting point to use a job demand assessment or another set of job descriptions, because really what you want to know is, what are people doing anyway? What are they spending most of their time doing? So you know, if people haven't spent a lot of time with lifeguards, they might think that all they do is stand beside the pool. And to be honest, they do spend a lot of time standing beside the pool. But it's nice to know what else they do, because that can assist you with determining other risk factors that they're exposed to. When you know what else they do, it also helps determine prioritizing different recommendations, or prioritizing one change over another. So for example, one thing I highlight frequently with lifeguarding is maintenance duties. So maintenance duties, bringing chemicals in and out, storing chemicals, using chemicals. That's kind of a big part of the job of many different lifeguards, depending on your facility and jurisdiction. One other things that you can get from job demand assessments is some assign kind of a manual handling level to each of the tasks, as it was done here. So this manual handling level is taken from the Canadian National Occupational Classification Guide. So it's an objective rating. It doesn't mean the person doing the evaluation is saying, oh, you know what, lifeguarding is heavy. They're looking at it and they're saying, if something is heavy, it means that that task is responsible for exerting more than 20 kilograms of force. Just full stop. That is one of the duties. Limited, a rating of limited means that they're exerting up to 5 kilograms of force. Light is up to 10 kilograms of force, and medium is exerting up to 20 kilograms of force. So you can find that on the WC Alberta or in the National Occupational Classification for Jobs. So it's, you know, looking over a job demand assessment, already I know I want to focus on lifeguarding and maintenance duties because they're both classified as heavy. So back to kind of the data. So we've got back, shoulder, leg. So in the postural considerations that we might look at for mobility with legs, the postures that we adopt, the leg postures that we adopt typically have to do with what we are interacting with. So if we're interacting with the floor, if we're interacting with a sloped surface, if we're interacting with a slippery surface, if we are climbing up stairs, if we're climbing up an angled ladder, or if we're climbing up a vertical ladder, all of those things will place the load onto our legs in a different way. Vertical ladders are typically a high flagging point for knee injuries, as is crawling and kneeling. So if there's a knee injury that we're trying to reduce or keep an eye on, I would look at crawling I'd look at kneeling. I'd look at any of those things that are throwing contact pressure to the knees or causing you to adopt an awkward posture, such as climbing vertical ladders. So we want to look at these existing JDAs to just see what's happening here. The other thing you might want to do is look at whole body postures. So how much time is spent standing, how much time is spent sitting, what kind of exposure is there to whole body vibration and jarring. And we want to minimize non-neutral postures. So if we are trying to minimize awkward leg postures, we want to make sure that our hips are above the knees, which are above the ankles, and that we don't have any contact pressure influencing them. So one way of minimizing non-neutral postures is being able to recognize when we are not in neutral postures. So depending on where you are watching this video right now, watching this webinar, I want you to try and adopt some of these postures so that you can recognize when you are moving in and out of them. So in terms of the back, we'll look at this fellow on the left. So if he's bending forward, we know that he's moving out of a neutral back posture. Our torso has a weight, has a load. So if you're bending forward, your body, specifically your lower back, is going to be working pretty hard to make sure that you don't fall over, to maintain this posture of leaning forward. One of the other non-neutral back postures we want to be able to recognize is if people are doing what we call lateral bending or sideways bending. Okay, so your shoulders are still pointing forward, your hips are still flush with your knees, but you're going to be moving from side to side. Okay, another non-neutral back posture would be twisting. So that is when your shoulders go out of alignment from your hips. Okay, so I want you to try that right now, just so that you can recognize when your back is going in and out of these postures. Our neck is the top part of our spine, and it's happiest when it's kind of looking straight ahead. It's neutral when it's looking straight ahead. But some non-neutral postures that we go into with our neck would be flexion, so bending forward. Also extension, we tip our chin backwards. Also, if we look forward, twist our head to the side. So these are non-neutral neck postures, and also bringing your ears into the side. So these are also stretches that you might adopt. But when we're holding these awkward non-neutral postures for a prolonged period of time, possibly with a force, with an external force attached to it, that can put us at risk for a musculoskeletal injury. Some of the other things, so we're just going to talk about back right now. So we talked about what awkward back postures may look like. And now when we're looking at the job demand assessment, we can see when these would actually happen in practice. So for example, when we're looking at the lifeguard JDA, sustained forward bending is required to complete daily cleaning tasks, probably to clean off the vanities, to clean off lockers, low lockers, benches, that type of thing. Sustained bending is also required during emergencies to hold patients in a stable position while waiting for EMS. They might alternate between kneeling, crouching, squatting, bending. So if you've got some knee or back injuries, you want to just kind of keep an eye on those. Back twisting, depending on what kind of movement is required in an emergency, that could be one flag. But also on a more regular basis, these lifeguards that I was looking at, they are carrying heavy objects up and down the stairs. So if you're carrying heavy objects, you might adopt kind of an awkward posture, especially if you're moving up and down the stairs. And especially depending on where handles are and if you have to hold onto a handrail. So just kind of keeping an eye on what is influencing those awkward postures. That's what I do. That's what I really want you to do as well. Look at the interactions. What is causing the awkward posture? So we'll move on to shoulders as well. If we're looking at awkward shoulder postures, that would be what we call abduction, holding our arms out to the side, like the person on the far right here. If you're holding your arms out right now, I want you to be kind of thinking about your shoulder. You've got nothing in your hands right now. You're just holding your arms. but you've probably noticed that your shoulders, maybe even your upper back and neck, are working a little bit. That's because your arms have a weight, so don't forget about that. When you bring your hands in a little bit, that does relieve a little bit of the weight required because we're bringing our hands in closer to neutral. We're reducing the force demands of the neck and the shoulders. So I really want you to pay attention to these awkward postures, because awkward postures have a lot to do with how our body reacts to those forces. So some of the other awkward postures that we see are flexion, like the person out on the left of your screen. So arms straight out in front, and also extension. So if you move your arms backwards. Okay, so those are some awkward shoulder postures. And where do we see these in the real world? We see them in lifeguards if they are using their hands above their head. So when are they doing this? If you're looking at a job demand assessment, this might be outlined really easily for you. If not, then you might just kind of look over your job demand assessment, or just ask people, you know, you've got some shoulder discomfort. What are some things that you do with your arms above your head? Or what types of activities tend to aggravate this? Maybe it's reaching. So it could be computer work, it could be rescues, it could be when you are doing some washing in the room after. It could be doing CPR. CPR isn't done frequently, thank goodness. But when it is done, it's extremely, extremely forceful on the shoulders, on the elbows, on the wrists. And even if it isn't done frequently in practice, it is completed by most lifeguards at least annually, if not a few times a year, on dummies, just to make sure that they've got their skills up. So keeping an eye out and looking at those force and awkward posture demands is pretty important. So when we look at force purely, I've highlighted a few different things in this job demand assessment that I just want to draw attention to. So some things like lifting a pool vacuum in and out by a lifeguard. It's going to weigh differently when it's empty versus when it is full. Even if it's not full of matter, it is going to be full of water when it comes out. So just kind of keep that in mind. They also lift people when they can. They do 2-person lifts for sure. But there's also some other, you know, just physical duties that a lifeguard might use. They might be moving stairs in and out. They might be moving mats in and out. They might be moving other recreational equipment in and out for the patrons to use. I like to look at the example of average female weight, average male weight. Even if that's a 2-person lift, that's still quite a bit of weight for one person to be holding. And if they are holding somebody during an emergency, the person that they're holding is probably not going to be able to help them out very much. So that's important to consider. I mentioned some of the heavy objects they have to lift during maintenance tasks. So this might be something that they do a few times once a week, or they might be emptying a pallet once a week or once a month. Carboys and bags of hydrochloric acid and sodium bicarb and salt, they usually weigh about 50 pounds each. So considering those types of weights are really important. So it's important when you are thinking about a job that you look at the activities that are done on a typical or daily basis, but also those things that are done on a weekly basis or monthly basis. Sometimes a little bit harder when we've got summer staff. They might be doing a lot to set things up for the summer and then kind of a tear down at the end of the year. I'm kind of thinking of golf, especially. There's a ton in golf to set things up, at golf courses to set things up, and then to tear down and prepare fences and cover the greens, as well as general maintenance throughout the season. So what I would really like you to do is find out what those hazards are And then you can use that information to help you when you are training your employees, new employees, ongoing employees. You want them to at least recognize what the hazards are, so that you can help them prevent them and help them make really good choices to reduce injuries. I really encourage organizations to take advantage of their workers' knowledge and experience and expertise in doing the job really well. And then saying to them, you know what, like, I've noticed that you are doing these tasks. They're pretty physical. How do you feel about this? Do you think that we can do this a better way or a different way? Or do you have any discomfort? And that kind of creates that safe space for sharing and brainstorming and finding new ways of doing things for existing employees, but also for new employees. We know that there's a high number of new employees and young employees who become injured every year. So sometimes it's because they are just unaware of the hazards. So it's up to us to make sure that the hazards are clear so that they can make those good choices. I encourage all employees to report hazards, report discomfort, so that it can be addressed quickly and we can find some resolution quickly and reduce further injury for those employees, but also to try and prevent injuries for their colleagues. One other reason why I'm such a huge fan of early reporting is because we know that if somebody reports something early and they receive really great treatment pretty early, then they're probably going to heal from that injury a lot faster than if they didn't. There's tons of really great controls and equipment that I see in workplaces all of the time. And most of the time, I would say that existing controls and equipment are used really, really well. But I'd be lying if I said sometimes I go into workplaces and I see these really great pieces of equipment that people aren't using. So I often ask, you know, why aren't you using this? Sometimes it's because people didn't know that it existed. Sometimes they haven't been trained on it, or sometimes it's broken. When I find out things are broken, it's like, well, have you reported it to anybody? Like, does your supervisor know that it's broken? Because, you know, somebody spent money on this tool. They obviously want you to be using it. So it would be really great if it could be repaired so that it could be used properly. So I do ask those questions. Make sure that you're asking those questions. Make sure that you're promoting the really good things that you have. And if there's opportunities to get more or replace, or just find out how people are using those tools and how you can make things a little bit easier for them. Another part of employee training is training employees to recognize the symptoms of musculoskeletal injuries, to go along with some of the hazards, so that they're able to fully share their discomfort and reduce the severity of their own injuries, but also reduce development of other people's injuries. Let me see here. Another way of trying to reduce injuries is to just kind of evaluate the job control that people have. Often if people have very little job control, it means that it's really up to the supervisors to make sure that they are organizing the work in a way that is going to be helpful for the employees. Conversely, if the employee has a lot of job control, you want to make sure that you as a supervisor are giving them the tools that they need so that they can organize the job well for them. I'll talk about that a little bit later. So in terms of tools and equipment, I think the beginning of the season, ideally like kind of a month before the season at least, is a good time to take inventory and make sure that you have everything that you need. That's why I say at least a month before. Have everything you need, make sure that it's all working accordingly, making sure that everything is set to go. It is repaired, it is working properly. Finding out if there's any gaps, if you need additional equipment, maybe talking to previous employees and finding out, you know, is the equipment that we have being used? Is it being used properly? If it's not being used, what can we do to fine tune it? The other thing that's really important is to make sure that if a piece of equipment was introduced to reduce a risk factor, you want to make sure that the piece of equipment is actually reducing the risk factor. So if it is a lift assist, for example, to help move people in and out of a pool, let's say, you want to make sure that the people using this piece of equipment for the lift assist is not going to be really cumbersome to use. You want to make sure that they don't have to exert a lot of force to push or pull or move it around, or that they have to lift the person into the lift assist. Then that's not really reducing the exposure to the hazard. Sometimes with different lift assists, I hear that it isn't long enough to reach what you actually need to do. Sometimes I hear that, you know, fittings are awkward or fittings are loose. You might need 2 handles to hold something appropriately, but there's only 1 handle. That could be an opportunity to improve things. You might find out that if people are using a piece of equipment, they're not using it because it slows them down. So that's not very helpful. So just finding out what barriers there are can help you turn something into a positive. With respect to personal protective equipment and cold temperatures and hot temperatures, those are a lot of variables that we don't have as much control over. And I'm including cold temperatures because there are many arenas, especially in Calgary and Alberta, that are still running during the summer. So one thing I see frequently, and I've experienced myself, is going into, you know, really cold arenas on a really hot day outside. And then you go into a really cold arena, you bundle up, and then you kind of have to remember, oh, I need to take off my coat and things like that before I go back outside. So there is a balance that needs to be made. When you're working in the heat, it's really important that you are kind of keeping track of that for your employees, making sure that they bring appropriate hydration to the job, making sure that, you know, you provide hydration if that's something that you said that you would do. And making sure that they've got opportunities for breaks in the shade or outdoors or indoors, you know, from the heat, and especially, you know, these last few years during wildfire season, so that they've got a break from that as well. I hear frequently hazards of working in the cold, gloves hindering dexterity, and just trying out different types of footwear, different types of ice cleats, depending on where the work is being finished, being completed. I've done a little bit with a few different arenas in Alberta, trialing different types of ice cleats and different types of boots, different types of assists, just so that the people who are doing the work on the ice are capable of doing that without foot injuries and knee injuries and hip injuries. So taking a look at the type of tools and equipment that's available is really important. Talking to other facilities to share tips of things that have worked really well for you, things that haven't worked really well for you. That's just going to advance all of us. I would like to know at some point near the end of the presentation if PPE is a challenge for you at your workplace. What types of PPE are the most challenging? What problems have you solved? Because ultimately, one of the things that I really love about these ergonomics coaching sessions every month is when I do get to hear things from you, but most importantly, if you guys get to share a few ideas with each other about problems that you've solved. I would love to know that. So I was talking a little bit about job control. I think it's really important when we do have job control that we are able to prepare for demanding physical activities in advance. So that can look like a few different things. That can look like the very beginning of a shift, identifying 4 big things that need to happen at some point during the shift, and then saying, you know what, we're going to do the heaviest task first. We're just going to do a warm up, and then we're all going to attack this big item first. Maybe it's laying down a new floor. Maybe it's pulling up a new floor. If you're preparing for concerts or things like that, you want to be doing heavy stuff kind of near the beginning of the day when your body is fresh. When physically demanding tasks are prepared for, we prepare our bodies for them a little bit better. We anticipate the amount of time it's going to take to complete a task. If you're a supervisor, you want to make sure that people aren't rushing through a really heavy, demanding task. That's another reason to try and go for those physically demanding tasks first thing in the day, so that you're not rushing at the end of your shift to get something done. When we can prepare our bodies for physically demanding tasks, we usually adopt better postures. Another thing I want to mention about job control is when you're training your new employees, make sure that you're identifying postural demands and forceful demands that are a choice or ones that are required. I'm thinking of a facility I used to work at where we used to push kids in a safe way, like on ropes and things like that. And so the kids would be on ropes, and then we'd kind of give them a good push, before they went in the water and that type of thing. And so we've got some control over the forces that we're exerting. I've seen other workplaces where they, push people on carts and trolleys. They might give them a big push. They might give them a push and a twist. So just make sure that it's very clear to employees what is a choice and what is required, and letting them know that if something is really, really forceful and might require them to twist their back while they're exerting something forceful, that is not how they should be doing that job. That's not a requirement for the job. That might actually put them at risk of injury. So just highlighting some of those things can be helpful. I find that when I'm training employees, when I have input from employees, it works out a lot better. I get a lot more engagement, and I get a lot more adoption of the different hazard reduction strategies. And I found kind of over the years that if I've kind of tailored some of these recommendations into what I'm just going to lead into right now with my 6 ergonomics principles, that they're kind of tailored to the job, but they're not so specific and prescriptive that people feel like they don't have some opportunities to finesse them a little bit. When I'm doing training, I like to give people opportunities to practice and troubleshoot what a variation might look like, and to troubleshoot these tips during typical scenarios, but also during exceptional scenarios, just to see what works. When we do a lot of training and practice, we do that so that it becomes kind of automatic for employees. We practice CPR frequently because we want to make sure that our skills are top notch, so that when we are doing CPR in real life, we don't have to be thinking about how many compressions we're supposed to give. We've got some strategies to be figuring that out while our mind is contemplating the next tasks, for example. Okay, so I've talked about dynamic warm-ups in other presentations. You can search through for those. But I really strongly encourage dynamic warm-ups for physical workplaces, because it really does prepare the body for work. It kind of gets everybody in the right mindset. It gets them thinking about warming up their body and acknowledging that the work that they're about to do is going to be pretty physical. So I'm going to go into these 6 different key principles right now. So one of the first ones has to do with optimizing your posture and considering forces that you are adopting. So ideally, I want a lot of the work off the floor. So first key principle is to keep things off the floor. I want the hands to be between the shoulder and the waist height as often as possible. Not all the time, but as often as possible. If we minimize floor level work, then that is going to optimize our back postures. So I like to encourage employees to adopt this by keeping things off the floor when they have a choice to keep things off the floor, and to take advantage of storing items in on shelves or higher locations. And they should do that as often as possible, because sometimes they won't have that choice. And then our body's better able to bend further on those times that we don't have to. I want people to be using lift devices when those are available. And I want you to also remember that it's the lumbar curve, the deepest curve on our lumbar back, that we want to maintain. So I want you to bend at your hips, stick out your bum, maintain that lumbar curve when you're handling items in that green zone, primarily. The next principle is I want you to kind of work to keep your hands below the shoulder. This might look like a few different things in practice. So in practice, it might look like standing on a platform so that you're able to keep your elbows closer to your body. This is a posture that will help your shoulders, your upper back, and your neck. In some cases, using tools with an extension is a great option, because it allows the tools to do the reaching for you. This is something that should definitely be practiced and trialed, because I have definitely seen some activities that are a little bit forceful, just made worse by adding extensions. So definitely try these things out. Another principle, or another tip, is to use clamps or fasteners or something else to hold an object in place while you use both arms for your work, instead of using one hand to hold an object and then manipulating it with the right. I frequently see injuries where people are saying, I'm right-handed, but the left side of my body really hurts. And I say, oh, what do you do with the left side? And they say, oh, well, nothing. I say, okay, well, let me watch you work for a little bit. And then I realize that they're actually sustaining an awkward posture with their left arm for quite a long time, while their right arm is doing some of the work. So that's something that can really help. Using lightweight tools as often as possible can reduce the overall load on the shoulders if you must work overhead. So keep that in mind. But once again, also trial the lightweight tools. Sometimes tools that are very heavy for a reason. Sometimes it's so that you don't have to exert that force yourself. So keeping hands below shoulder is the second tip here. And it's because we want to keep the shoulders in a neutral posture. So if we are further looking to reduce shoulder injuries, we want to keep the elbows close to the body. I always say I want the elbows close to the body in all different directions, because we want to prevent shrugging the shoulders. We want to prevent rounding the shoulders forward, which we do when we reach. So we want to keep elbows close to the body. I like these images that I'm borrowing here from CREMSD and msdprevention.com. Key principles. Number 3, keep it close. I want you to right now to sit or stand, whatever you're doing, with the elbows close to the body. If you move your hands in a windshield wiper fashion, this is where I want your hands to be, and this is where I want your employees hands to be, most of the time, because I want them doing most of their work with the elbows close to the body. This keeps the back straight, it keeps the shoulders neutral, and it allows them to work in close postures, good postures as often as possible. And if they're manipulating heavy items, if they're pushing or pulling or exerting lots of forces, the back is better able to handle it when the hands are closer to the body. So we want to keep items close as much as you possibly can. And you want to move your feet so your spine doesn't have to be twisting around. Okay. We've learned on our stats that the low back is the most frequently injured body part in Alberta, and I will say that it's also across Canada. So it is really, really, really important to maintain this low back curve. One of the images on the left is showing how the low back is curved when you stoop forward, but if you stick your bum out, you're able to maintain that low back curve a little bit better, and your knees are still over your ankles, and you're able to kind of get into that better squat position to do some lifting or pushing or pulling, anything that's going to require force from your torso. You want all of those forces to go directly along your back and into the legs. The legs are really strong, are the strongest part of our body. That's where we want to be diverting the forces to. So whatever we can do to adopt a neutral back posture so that we're diverting the forces to using our legs is the best thing that we want to be able to do. One of the other tips is we want to be able to look straight ahead. So when we're thinking about looking straight ahead, we're thinking about neck postures, optimizing our neck postures, but we're also keeping safety in mind too. We want to set up your workspace so that you can look straight ahead. We want you to be able to see what you're doing. We want you to clear clutter away so that you've got smooth path. We want you to be able to see all of the hazards so that you are appropriately able to respond and manipulate and react appropriately. Knee injuries are pretty big. They in that graph that I showed, they are part of leg injuries. As we become older, our knees are a little bit more beat up than they were when we were younger, let's say. I'm seeing a lot of knee injuries with older workers. So I like to try and reduce knee injuries or reduce aggravating knee injuries in the workplace as much as possible. We want to keep them as strong as we can. So the knee is strongest when it is aligned with the hips and the ankle, and when we're able to push the body weight into the middle of the foot. So we want to make sure that we've got kind of that straight line, like the image on the right side. When we're able to align the leg in a neutral posture, the muscles that run along the thighs and along the shins are in a straight line. We're able to use them effectively along their line of action. This allows the knee to work a little bit harder because it's in a stronger posture, and thus puts us at a lesser risk of injury, okay, because we're limiting that the shear forces that we might experience from side to side movement of the knee and knee twisting. Okay, so we always want to make sure that things are set up well for success. One of the fifth key principle is that we want to make sure that we've got a good grip. So we want to make sure that we've got a grip so that our hands and our arms are in a really good, strong posture. You want to choose a tool that is appropriate for the task, and you also want a tool that fits your hand. I have pretty small hands. If I'm using something that is too big for my hands, I'm not going to have an appropriate grip on it. If I don't have an appropriate grip, then I'm going to be engaging different muscles in my arm, and that is not going to feel very good. So I really encourage tools that match the task. The handle should be bent, not the wrist. If you've got a variety of different statures on your workforce, and you're capable of having a variety of different handle sizes, try to do that so that you don't run into people with really large hands using teeny tiny little tools, or people with smaller hands like me, using really large handled tools that we can't properly grip. We might slip, and that will be an issue. Also, back to one of the other tips from before, use clamps and fasteners to hold things down as much as you can, just to free up other hands when you can. I also encourage you to look over your tools at least, kind of before you're kicking off a season, and replacing things that are broken. The last principle that I want to talk about here is changing things up. So make sure that if you are designing work for somebody to do, that you are designing it so they've got some posture breaks. Ergonomists talk about posture breaks a lot. We don't mean, coffee breaks, sitting with your feet up, that kind of thing. We mean posture changes, working rests, micro breaks with different activities built in that allow different parts of the body to recover. Sometimes this looks like job rotation in a lot of different facilities. Job rotation and task rotation is really important. It uses different parts of the brain, it uses different parts of the body. So, one task might be more arm intense, another task might be more back intense, another task might be more brain intense. So just being able to identify and encourage your employees to change around other tasks at their own discretion, or if you're providing that rotation guidance, that's a really good thing to do. Also consider opportunities for moving people between indoors and outdoors, especially if you've got people where there's a wildfire or cold or hot temperature considerations. Always remember, though, that job rotation should not be the only thing that you do to reduce musculoskeletal injury hazards, especially forceful hazards. Job rotation and task rotation are really good for reducing the repetition side of exposure, but not as great for force. So make sure you're looking at all of your different options. So just to kind of sum up, really important to locate the risk factors in the workplace, involve the workers with methods of reducing musculoskeletal injury risk, and having a safety culture where you can communicate back and forth and they can share ideas, and you can provide input is fantastic. Encourage your employees to do a dynamic warm-up. Through AMHSA, there is a fantastic dynamic work material that you can take advantage of. A lot of it is free. You just have to find it, and we can send it to you, which makes it a lot easier to find. If you're going to incorporate training for your employees, make sure that it's targeted, make sure that it is incorporating ergonomics principles and body awareness that targets injury reduction for the hazards that you have identified. I have talked about a ton of information over the last 50 minutes, which I tried to put into 45. If you have any questions, I would absolutely love to hear them right now. And if this goes on a little bit longer, please feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions. I'd love to talk to you.